Click
I
the
was
go
just
live
looking.
button.
All right.
You want me to do a quick intro?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. I believe we are live now.
Hey, we're here with the ACC Game Dev Club, and today we have one half of Fat Bard, Patrick Chrysalius. He's going to talk to us about upping your game audio. So pretty cool since we don't really have a game audio program in our course. So I think this will be pretty awesome for everybody to attend and check out. So, hey, Pat.
Hey.
So glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's fun to do these kinds of talks, especially a lot of college game programs game design programs do not have a lot of emphasis on audio, right? But it plays a pretty darn important role. And so it's definitely good to get hip to the creative possibilities of it, even if you are not going to be doing the audio for a game, right? It's still important to understand that aspect of it so that when you do maybe work with somebody, bring somebody on the project, you know what to expect, and you can maybe bring some ideas to the table and just have good communication with them, because it's a different discipline, right? With a different set of vocabulary. Sometimes it's hard to communicate effectively if you don't have the vocabulary. You don't necessarily know what the audio person is doing or what they could do for the project, right? I was going to start with a little presentation here, and then we're going to do some Q&A about halfway through. But so let me go ahead and hit present and share screen and whatnot. Let's see. A window. Share this. There we go. Okay. So let's present this. Can you all see that? I assume you can, right?
Yep. Looks good.
Okay. So upping your game audio. So we're going to kind of move through this, and I can share these this little slides, after the fact. You guys can share a link to this if anyone wants to check this out later. But anyways, a little bit about me, right? So I graduated from music school, right? I did audio engineering. I did not pursue game dev. I actually didn't even start pursuing it until I was 28 and had my first kid. And now I am 36 and eight years in. But I also own a little company called Cedar Box Studio, and we basically do music education and recording in St. Louis. Although in the last couple of years, I've done kind of less and less lessons and less recording as game audio has really sort of taken over, and I'm basically full time doing game audio. Anyways, I recorded, albums with local artists, stuff like that. I co-own Fat Bard, which is, yes, a really ridiculous name, but again, a name that you will probably not forget, which is really all that matters. And with some fun branding with that too. But anyways, my partner, his name is Zach Fendelman, and we work together, both composing and both doing sound design, basically splitting everything. It's not that one of us does one thing and one does the other. We both do everything. And obviously, I'm a gamer, and have played games since back in the day when I was a wee lad. But anyways, so the reason why I wanted to do this talk is because if you're an independent game developer, you need a whole lot of different things, right? You need a logical-minded program, creative-minded design, an eye for art, an ear for music. But most people usually have two of these, right? Not all of these things. There are very few people that are kind of jacks of all trade, right? So what that means is you got to do some research. You got to learn when to do something yourself and when to outsource work. Learn to communicate effectively with work for hires, the people that you're collaborating with. So if you're doing the second thing, sort of working with somebody else. Oh, hey, this is like. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, it's fine, honey. This is like that guy on the news, right?
Sorry.
It's fine. It's no problem, honey. Did I lock the door? Oh, apparently I didn't lock the door. Well, anyways, that's life, folks. I work from home. Anyways, so yeah, when you have like a work for hire, you need to learn how to like talk effectively, right? And know a little bit about the field that person is working in. And that's a big part of our focus with what I'm talking about right now. So let's learn a little bit about music and sound effects and whatnot. There's a lot of music lingo that's good to know. And this lists some of it. But in the end, honestly, the important thing is having a vocabulary that you can share. It doesn't necessarily matter that you know what tempo, pitch, rhythm, dynamics going on here, like melody, chords, song sections, motifs. It doesn't necessarily matter that you know exactly what these things are and you know the exact word for them. Because honestly, even within other audio people, we sometimes use different words. The important thing is that you have a common language and that you figure that out by maybe communicating through references or something, like playing a song off YouTube and saying, "Oh, I like this song because X and Y." And then when you're talking to an audio person about that, they can sort of pick up on what words you use to mean certain things, sort of can translate your vocabulary. And then you have this common language that you can talk with, you know? But anyways, let's move on here. So in video games, there's an awful lot of genres. You can do all of these things: indie rock, alternative rock, new wave, punk, anime, blues, lullaby, avant-garde, choral, minimalism, medieval, you know, and even klezmer, right? At the very end there. And the important thing is that basically, you know, if you are an indie developer or just a game studio and you're looking for music, just don't always assume that you're going to do something like orchestral or chiptune or something, right? There are so many styles of music that you can work with, right? And it's important to be open to that. When we are talking to developers and starting a new project, we are almost always talking and referencing music that is not in games. We are talking, we'll send stuff that, like, if we're doing something like, let's say it's kind of electronic, right? Instead of sending like a reference, oh, here's a song from an electronic game, right? That's like, you know, a match to this game that we're working on, right? We don't do that. We will bring in something that's outside of the video game realm. We'll bring an electronic song that's just like whatever. It's like a pop song or whatever. Or it's some song that's on like Spotify, you know, a workout list or something, you know, playlist. And we'll just bring that in, right? Because we want to sort of bring in new things, right? If you're just going to repeat history, like, what's the point, right? Try to bring new influences in. So be open to all kinds of different styles of music. The power of music. So let's talk about what music does, right? It greatly influences player perception, right? Like, imagine that I am in a first-person shooter, right? And the music that I hear is like, you know, it's like some like intense metal thing, right? Like a game like Serious Sam, if you ever heard of that. That immediately makes me think like this game is just meant to be fast paced. And I'm supposed to just not really worry about conserving ammo. And I'm just going to blow up everything in sight. Right. And it's meant to be sort of almost joyful and ridiculous, like Doom or something. Right. But if I hear something that maybe there's no music and there's just an ambience track, like water dripping and, you know, weird little sounds in the background that are all reverbed out. So they sound really far away. It's like, what was that? You know? That's going to make me think in this first-person shooter I'm talking about that maybe I should conserve my ammo and I should be moving slowly through the levels because something's going to happen and I cannot just, you know, run around just like, right? So music immediately sets the mood and maybe even directs you as to what kind of game you're playing and what you should be doing, right? So some things to think about, right? Should the difficulty or the intensity or the pace of the game be reflected in the score, right? If I have a platformer game where, like Meat Boy or something, right, where you're dying constantly, like you're trying to do something really difficult and you just keep doing it over and over, you know, should the soundtrack reflect that challenge, right? Or should I make it so that the game tries to make the player feel not so bad about dying and not get frustrated by making the music feel more lighthearted, right? Like it's not a big deal that you died, right? Should the music be ambient, moody? Should it be cinematic? Should it be memorable, catchy? Should it be responsive, where like it actually changes depending on in-game situations, right? Should, you know, think of like an MMO game, right? And you're just like traveling through the woods and you hear this little like background woodsy song or whatever. And then you see like an orc in the distance and someone's like, right, the battle drums come in. It's like, you know, because now you're in battle mode, right? Like, should it be responsive like that? Or should it not? Should the song work with or against the scene, right? Should it be a juxtaposition where maybe the music creates an interesting aesthetic because the music is not exactly what you would expect? Like a pixel art game that doesn't have chippy kind of music, right? Or retro sounding music. What if it has like a straight up full real sounding orchestral soundtrack, right? Does that create an interesting thing, you know, interesting contrast, right? Or should it just follow the scene and really be gelled in with that and create this really strong aesthetic that you kind of expect, that's comfortable and what we're used to, right? Music can be just as important as art in giving a game personality. Of course, right? It's like pretty much half of the experience, right? You have art and you have audio. It's just that a lot of times art feels like the first impression, right? Because you see it before you even really play the game, right? You see it on the box art, you see it in advertisements, etc. But it's just as important. It can be used with or against the visual art to create a strong identity, like I was just talking about, doing something that's maybe contrasting or that gels with it. Mixing up a music genre that normally wouldn't be used in a certain art style can be very effective in making something unique. Like I was just saying, it's another, that's a really effective thing to do. It's really good for branding, can help your game really stand out. Characters can have their own music theme to bring them to life. Many RPGs use this tactic, right? Like, thinking of old retro like JRPGs, right? Like Chrono Trigger or something, right? The frog theme comes out and you're like, yay, it's Frog. Every time he shows up or does something heroic, you hear their theme, their little song, right? Or you could even hear their song reused in a different situation and maybe instead of sounding heroic, it sounds sad because maybe like they die or something, right? And you hear that same melody come back in, this sort of hummable thing, but it's now, in a different context, right? It can be really good to give like a character an identity, right? Like operas do that. And this goes back like centuries, right? People have done this for a long time. Music is the glue, creates cohesion between locales that are completely different, right? If your game has, very different situations, right? It can be the thing that ties it together. Think of Mario games that take place in very, very different areas, right? But the music still has this cohesion to it that makes it so that it's not weird for you to be in like a desert and then a city and then a sewer or whatever, right? You can help, music helps tie together key moments in the story arc, right? Again, if I had like a character theme, right? And every time this character's talking or has like a story beat, you hear their song, right? And maybe you hear it again when something really sad happens, and again, maybe you have a sad version of that song. Like no matter what, it sort of just keeps tying together everything. The use of musical motifs, themes aids this binding concept immensely. It's a must when you're trying to brand something. So what I mean by that is like, think of Zelda, right? Zelda games reuse the same songs and little melodies all over the place in all of the Zelda games, right? And it creates this sense of brand, right? When you play a Zelda game, you're going to hear those same little songs, even if they're just like put in very subtly, like.
Well, seems we have briefly lost Pat.
Yeah. I'll message him.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that from the live stream.
As you're in like the forest area.
Oh, all right, we're back.
Oh, how long did you lose me here?
Oh, you were demonstrating, or you were giving the example of
long.
Zelda, just like, I think you were about to demonstrate like a couple melodies or something.
Yeah. Well, so in Zelda, basically, we're going to go back there. In Zelda, basically, it helps with the branding of the game, right? To hear those songs that you've heard in previous games kind of reused again, right? Maybe in the exact same way or maybe in different ways, right? Like the Skyward Sword theme is the Zelda lullaby backwards. The song ba da da bum 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 bum. It's literally that melody reversed. Even something subtle like that is kind of like still cool and useful. But anyways, so music can be implemented in creative and abstract ways. So now we're done talking. Let's talk about how you can put music in a game, right? So implementing means like putting it into the game, right? It's not just I'm finished the song, I'm just going to throw it to the developer and say, just throw it in the game and loop it around whenever we're in like, when you're in the forest area of the game, the song is just going to loop over and over, right? You could have multiple tracks looping, right? I could have 3 different tracks, right? That are all looping at the same time, but the volume of each one is different depending on in-game circumstances, right? Like I have this let's say I'm doing sort of an exploration game that has some battle, right? So maybe when you're just exploring, you're hearing just this one loop, right? That's more subdued and kind of exploratory and quieter, right? And then when you get into a battle situation, suddenly this other track that's been looping the whole time in sync with the other track rises up in volume, right? And now you're hearing like the battle drums, right? And when that ends, that battle loop, like it fades out and it goes back down in volume, so you don't hear it anymore, even though it's actually still looping just silently. You can have the game itself sync to the music, right? Of course, tons of games do this, right? Like anything like Guitar Hero and like Beat Saber and all these games, right? Thumper, where it's really like a big part of the game's mechanic, but it can also just be something even more subtle, like even Crypt of the Necrodancer, right, is a great example of this, where music syncs to it and it actually syncs to you moving, but it's not necessarily the entire game, right? It's not like a music, kind of like input things to the do the exact thing it's telling you to do, like DDR or something, right? Like that, right? Music can be used in replacement of conventional sound effects to give triggered cues a greater sense of identity. What I mean by that is, like, let's say you open a chest, right, in Zelda, right? Instead of just going, the chest opens, right, and you're just like, yay, I got a heart or whatever. It goes like, you're like, yeah, I got a heart, and it makes getting that heart like way more dramatic and impactful than if I just had the sound effect of like a chest opening, right? So like actually just doing little musical jingles, right, can be really great for that. When you level up, when you craft something really cool, just any key moment like that, you can think about that and say, how am I going to make this part juicy, right? How am I going to make this part like feel really good, right? And sometimes thinking of a little musical cue there can be, a great thing. So now let's talk about the power of sound effects. We talked about music. Now it's time to talk about sound effects or sound design. One big thing about it is it gives players feedback. You should work with this mindset instead of just saying, I need sound effects in my game because it's just something I got to check off my list, right? I know every game has sound effects, and I've worked on this game for 6 months, and I'm almost done with this kind of small scale game I'm doing. And this last week, I'm just gonna like slap some sound effects in, so it's just done, right? That is a bad way to go about it. You should think about sound effects as a thing that informs players and gives them feedback, so things are satisfying. So 2 key things: making it satisfying to do things and to inform the player. So even basic sounds like UI buttons give a game a feel and a mood. Think about just navigating a Nintendo Switch, just the UI when you just open it. All these little clicky tactile sounds, man, it feels so good. Just like move back and forth in it, That's important, right? It just feels so satisfying. Sound effects are a great way to alert the player to their surroundings, to their current status, as well as inform them what to do next, right? Like when obvious things are like when you fight a boss, right? And they have like a telegraphed attack. Like it's obvious they're going to do this. They're raising their arm. They're going to swing down and hit you, right? And when they raise their arm, they're like, I'm going to get you or whatever, right? Obviously not that because that's ridiculous. But, having a sound to help cue you for that is really good, right? Some kind of like build up, charge up sound. So it's really obvious they're about to do something, right? You can inform players of when in like a multiplayer game, for example. Sometimes you can even know like what another player is doing and what they have, right? Think of a game like, let's see, Counter-Strike, right? I don't know if anyone has played Counter-Strike here, but Counter-Strike's first-person shooter, right? With it's like a tactical first-person shooter. And it's really important to know what's going on, right? And if let's say it's just down to one person and on one team, one person on the other team. When you walk around, you hear those little footsteps, right? And so like you will know where the other player is when they're moving around if they're not walking, right? If they're running, you're going to hear. And so it's going to help you know where they are. Or early in a game, you're going to know if someone has the big, powerful sniper rifle. And that means you need to like not just be standing in the open, because you're going to hear you like, if you play that game, you know what the AWP sniper rifle sounds like. It is really obvious. It immediately informs you, and everyone on the team be like, oh, there's a guy AWP in the back, like in the backfield, like look out for it, right? Sounds really inform us. And it's especially important in multiplayer games, not just competitive games, but even cooperative games, like a beat 'em up or something like that, right? Like in the old Gauntlet games, it'd be like, wizard needs food badly. Like it'll tell you when one player is hurt and needs help, right? Sound effects give characters personality. Simple voice I can go a long way. Even just grunts and groans, right? Think of Zelda 64 has like, the Link's characters like just like things like that. They just add so much to the character, even if they're not like, my name is Link and I'm going on an adventure, right? That almost like ruined the game in some ways. Some games, like, you don't even want voice acting, right? But you do want little sounds for doing things, like just those little grunts and groans. They just add a lot. And honestly, as long as you are, in it to win it, you can really get into character. Even you can do it. You don't need to hire like a voice actor to do that stuff sometimes, as long as you can, or someone that can really like get into a character, and just kind of like do that believably, right? You can't just be like, yeah, you got to like go for it, get loud. The mouth can be used to create just about any character voice, with proper editing and processing, right? Like we do a lot of games where we have to do creature sounds, right? And like, say probably like 85% of the creature sounds we do are just like, it's me or Zach's voice, just be like, or whatever, right? And then we add a bunch of processing so it sounds like something unreal, right? You'd be surprised what you can do with that, with just pitch shifting and various other sort of like effects you can add to it. Sound effects can give players new strategies and mechanics to work with through the simple act of listening, right? Any combat-based game can benefit from some audio tells to give away the next move of the enemy. Boss encounters rely on this heavy. That's kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier, right? In multiplayer games, again, like I was talking about earlier, this is a must. Players typically need a way to locate other players by listening, or to just be informed about, what their status is, right? If you're in a co-op game, knowing when your player, a buddy needs help or something like that. So let's talk a little bit more about implementing, right? So if I'm implementing music, loops are the most common way of doing this, right? It's good for game scenes that have like a variable length. You don't know how long the scene's going to be, so you need a looping thing, right? It needs to have a seamless start and end so the player doesn't notice when the music loops. The most jarring thing is like when you take people out of the gameplay experience because the song like has a little hiccup when it loops. It's like da 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 ba 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 ba, and it continues, right? It's like when you're playing the game, you're like, oh, that was weird. You could have different loops that are sequenced in a set or random order, right? Maybe you could have 3 different 1-minute loops that just chooses between them as it goes, so that it's not always a super predictable thing. You can combine loops with variables governing when they begin and end. The other thing, of course, is just like a one-shot thing, right? A scripted sequence when you just have a song that just begins and ends, right? You're going to use it for time-limited gameplay, like a mini game or something that runs, there's a timer, right? Cutscenes, trailers can be created to fit in existing visual lengths, or can be created with the visual fitting to the music, right? When you're making a trailer or any promotional thing for your game, a lot of times you're going to start with the music and then edit to that. Don't make a trailer edit and then ask the musician to compose something that just perfectly fits those cuts. That is a nightmare situation for a musician. Please don't do that. Sometimes the music is simply background, but good scripted sequences sync the music and visuals up at key moments to engage the player and the viewer, right? If it's like a really big emotional beat, having the music like swell up, right? It's going to really make that moment impactful. So when you don't want just a loop that's kind of just creating this static dynamic sound, it's kind of nice to have something that really like goes up and down and swells. And so a scripted sequence is maybe better for that. And so that's one shots versus loop. What I was just talking about, like a loop just goes over and over, right? One shots are a single thing that happens, just one time, right? So in sound effects, you're mostly going to be using one shots, right? Where you just play the sound effect once. You're going to jump, right? But you can obviously have looping sound effects like ambiances are going to loop, right? Charge ups. Maybe you have a charge up that's just like a static noise. It just goes ooh, looping around the short audio file loops, right? But then as you're charging up, you program it so the pitch moves upward. Ooh, right? Can really add a lot to it. Or like if you're collecting things, like let's say you're collecting coins or whatever, right? It's a one-shot sound, but every single time that you collect the coin, it goes up in pitch each time within a certain like time threshold. Maybe like after like 2 seconds, that pitch resets. It'll be like, wait. And then if you wait a second and then pick up coins, it starts back over, right? That can be really, really useful for any kind of collectible pickup thing. Round robins. This is an important thing a lot of people don't think about. When you're making sound effects or implementing sound effects, a lot of times you need more than the one of the same exact sound. If I have a jump, I don't always necessarily want to hear the exact same sound for jump because that's going to get really, really annoying. Any like really repetitive action. It's nice to have round robins, which means it's the same sound, but like variations on it. And you're randomly choosing which one you're going to hear every time it's called up. So maybe you have like jump _1, jump _2, jump _3. And they each sound a little bit different from each other. It's not just a pitch difference. It's an actual like slightly different sound. It adds a lot of variety and realism. Pitch shifting is always good to do in any game, really. Anytime you want to have a script that sort of overall takes all of the sound effects, maybe not UI sounds, but all of the in-game sound effects and randomizes them just a little bit, just above and below. Let's say your value is 1 for default pitch, maybe just like 0.1, plus or minus 0.1, or even like 0.05 or whatever. Just so that if you go whoop, 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 it's going to be like whoop, 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 whoop. It's going to change pitch a little bit when you repeat that sound. Voice limiting is another important thing, and this can be difficult depending on the game engine you're working with. But you're basically trying to control the amount of sounds that can be heard at once. This is especially useful in multiplayer games or things where there's a lot of games where there's a lot of stuff happening on the screen at once. You're going to want to limit how many of those sounds can be heard at once, right? And you're going to prioritize them. So maybe you'll make player sounds have higher priority than enemy sounds, right? So let's say you're just doing like a hack and slash kind of game. You're turning around just like mowing down all these little goons, right? And your sounds will have higher priority. And maybe you'll make it so, okay, we can only hear 10 sounds at once, no matter what. At any given moment, there can only be 10 sounds playing at the same time. I'm going to make it so that player sounds are prioritized. But past that, then I've got all my enemy sounds. So let's say I am doing 3 sounds at the same time as a player, and that leaves 7 sounds for enemies that are around me, right? And maybe I can even prioritize within enemies and say, okay, within proximity, the closest enemies, I'm going to hear their sounds. The ones that are far away, I'm not going to prioritize them, and their sounds are just not even going to trigger and happen. This is important because, man, games can get really noisy, like really noisy. Games like Binding of Isaac and stuff like any game where like maybe it's like just like a twin stick shooter or something. There's just a lot going on. You need to control the sound because otherwise it's going to get loud and really out of hand. When you're implementing sound effects, you can create a sense of space. Use like reverb zones or ambient zones to give different areas their own characteristic sound. So that they, when you go from one area to another, it really sounds different, even though maybe you're just reusing the exact same sound effects over and over. Like the footsteps sound different in one area versus another because you have reverb zones. You can use fancy stuff like audio occlusion, right? Where you can make stuff sound like it's behind objects and walls, like in another room. You can alter all sounds by using group volume and global effects for moments such as being flashbanged, explosions, special areas like outer space, etc. So like, for example, in Borderlands, was it the prequel maybe? You go in outer space a lot, or you're outside in space a lot. And what happens is all the sounds basically it reduces the treble on all of it. So like in Unity, it's going through an audio group in their own built-in audio mixer, and all the treble is just being cut out. So instead of sounding like this, when you get like flashbanged in like Counter-Strike, for example, right? It has this really high-pitched squeal, almost like a tinnitus sound, right? And this right? And all the other sounds just drop in volume, and then they slowly rise back up as the flashbang fades out. You can do that with explosions to make the explosions even more impactful. Whenever like there's a grenade that explodes, all the other sounds drop, whoop, just like this real quick dip in volume. They just go whoop, while the explosion's like poof, right? It makes it so you're highlighting things, right? Or maybe you drop out all the music when you do certain things, right? Maybe the music is affected by stuff like that. Anyways, we are gonna skip this because this is honestly not that important. We're gonna talk about working with people. So we're talking about working with musicians and sound folk. This is specifically, I mean, this works both ways. This is for people that want to do audio and games. This is for people that are going to maybe bring in someone to do audio and games, right? The sound baby cycle. We're going to make a sound baby. So we need to plan for the baby. So the first thing we do is consult on the general overall direction of the music and sound effects beyond what's on, like, you know, just like on an asset list like this. These are the things I need for the game, right? Let's go beyond that and say, okay, what is the overall direction? What are we going for here? You know, using references is a great way to do this, right? Maybe having a talk about references before anything is even made, right? Saying, oh, well, you know, maybe as the developer, you send some references to the audio person saying, this is kind of what I was thinking. And then maybe the music person says, oh, that's cool. Maybe let's narrow the field. And they send back some of their own references, you know, that are just like YouTube links or whatever to music and say, or, you know, or sound design saying, this is kind of what I, you know, this, so let's counter that and have a little conversation through references, right? The next thing you're going to do is have a trial baby. Start small and, you know, do a short sample of a song or maybe a small batch of sound effects. This is just so people aren't wasting time, right? You want to make sure, you know, within 30 seconds of a song, as a developer, you should be able to make a pretty clear decision on whether you like what's going on or not, right? You don't want to make someone make like a 2-minute song and then just like shut them down, right? And have to redo it. And obviously, as an audio person, you don't want to waste your time too, right? You want to make sure you're doing something small and just say, okay, what do you think about this? And then you extend it. With sound effects, a really good idea is to not just make it, but to get it implemented, put it in the game and see how it feels. Sound design almost always requires more time to really make a decision on. Music, you can sort of listen to and make a pretty quick decision on how you're feeling about it or not. And then you'll put it in game and try it as well and kind of maybe confirm that decision or change your mind. But with sound design, you really need to put it in game. You really need to put it in game and see, does this work or not? Because you need to see all the situations, because sound effects are triggered, right? It's not just a song that just loops or whatever, right? In a situation, they're triggered. And you need to make sure that they fit with all the actions you can do in the game, right? All right, step 3. Are you ready to be a parent? Send constructive feedback on the trial before the musician sound designer completes the work, so no time's wasted, like I was saying before. If it's not the right direction, just start it over. Start the process over. Don't just continue forward with something that you're not happy with. Really important to just communicate and say how you feel. Don't be a developer that is afraid to give negative feedback, right, with anyone they're working with. Don't be that person. It is way better to be upfront and to say whether you like something or not right off the bat. You do not want to waste people's time, and you also don't want to create a false, you know, sense of security for the audio person, because they're just going to continue working in that direction with like future songs and future sound design. It's only going to become more and more of a problem, right? Step 4, deliver the baby. You know, after doing any more back and forth, everybody's happy. You send it over and everything's good. Communication is just like such an important thing to this, right? Both parties should use basic terminology, you know, unless something really specific to the craft is required. And that was kind of what I was talking about at the very beginning of this, right? There's all kinds of musical terms, but you need to come up with a common language that you can both use to talk about stuff. You know, when in doubt, use references. If you are a developer trying to say to someone, you know, I don't like this certain aspect of this song pitch that you sent me, use a reference. Say, can you, I don't like the drums, but I can't describe why I don't like them, but I can give you a reference of these drums that I do like. And then maybe the audio person can riff off that and say, oh, okay, so what you really mean is X. And then, you know, maybe they'll repeat back something that is kind of what you meant to say, but you didn't have the vocabulary to say it. Be courteous, be humble, respect each other's expertise. You know, it's important to have that collaborative feel, right? We have definitely worked on projects where developers are just like, do this thing, do it, robot, do the thing, right? Those projects are not so fun, though. It's much better to be a developer where you are, you know, you're trusting the person a little bit, right? There's going to be some give and take on both sides, right? Where they're going to move closer to your line, you're going to move closer to their line, right? Try to do that in a project. Don't be incredibly controlling. give the audio people some sense of freedom and creativity, because only good things come out of that. You're going to be surprised by what they do, things that you didn't expect, right? And very importantly, learn from each other, right? The more that you learn about audio as a developer, the better you're going to do every further project. Every time you bring in a new audio person, or even work with the same audio person across projects, the better your workflow is going to be, the better your communication is going to be, if you know more about their craft. And the same thing goes for audio people. You need to learn about what developers, what programmers do, what designers do, what art people do, as you're working on a project, so that you can communicate well with them and know what to expect from their workflow and how they're going to implement things, or whether you're going to do it. And you can even just give them advice on stuff if you know what they're going to do with your sounds. It's just incredibly important. Anyways, so that basically is the presentation here. Let's see, I went 6 minutes over. Oh no. So we're kind of just opening up to Q&A. And let's see, I'm going to stop sharing here. And here I am. Oh, here I am. Yeah, I would. Usually what I do with presentations like this is I try to give audio examples, like just directly from games and such. But because of all the licensing things that are going on right now, I can't do that. I don't want this video to get taken down if you upload it later. But hopefully I did enough explaining there that things kind of made sense there. It is a little harder when I don't have, exact references to show you. But anyways, yeah, so just opening up to Q&A. I don't know if Grant or Marcy, if you had any direct questions to kind of start this off, or if you had any questions from people you knew that you wanted to throw in here.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions prepared, and we can start asking those while we wait for anybody in the stream audience to send anything in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I've got a few things. First, sure. Thank you. That was super awesome, Pat. I really think that was very comprehensive and very informative to a lot of folks.
Cool.
I guess I'm not going to ask you what DAW you use.
Don't do that.
But maybe you could talk about middleware and maybe what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So middleware is basically software that can be used with a game engine like Unity or Unreal, sort of in conjunction with it. And what it does is it sort of allows the audio person to kind of do a lot of the programming of the music and sound design in its own software environment that is maybe more. It's a little easier for audio people to use. It's a little bit more intuitive. And the possibility, it's basically an entire audio system just already built for you, ready to go. That's probably the most important thing here. And it's very easy to integrate it with your game engine. And it's pretty quick to learn as like a programmer, like how to call sounds from that middleware. There's two that are really popular, Fmod and WISE. They both have different pricing schemes. Now, the important thing to know is these can cost money, right? And that can be a turnoff to a lot of people, right? Especially indie developers. Like, I don't want to spend extra money on using audio middleware because my audio budget already maybe isn't as big as I want it to be, and I don't want to spend extra on something. However, Fmod is free to use if your budget is under 500K, which fits probably about 95% of all indie people. So that's good. So you can use Fmod. All you gotta do is just put their logo on your splash screen. That's it. You're done. Works on every platform. It also makes, you can have a preset platform exports, which is really, really nice. Your audio is going to work on every single platform, including mobile. WISE does have a free plan, but it's a little bit more limiting. I got to look it up again. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's to get 250 free sounds essentially that you can put into the project. And that can be really good for a lot of people, but for some projects that is very limiting. It depends, especially on how much sound design you're going to do in a project. Fmod is a little more intuitive for people that are musically inclined. It looks like a DAW. WISE is a little bit more programmer centric. It is really, really powerful and can in fact do some things that Fmod cannot do. But it is definitely a little bit more, I guess it's more sound designer centric, let's say, than musically centric, composition centric. That being said, both of them can do pretty much anything that you're going to need in a game. Fmod has a lot of great tutorials. They have a lot of good example projects. The entire Celeste Fmod project is available for free to download. You can literally just look at their Fmod project it's got notes and everything. So you can kind of hit the ground running and learn a lot about the software.
You can also you can hook it into the actual game itself if you have a PC copy of the game.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really useful thing you can do. You can actually watch Fmod do its thing while you play the game and actually see what's happening under the hood.
Yeah, so that is one thing that Fmod and WIS also offer in general. You can hook it up to the game engine. So if I have a project in Unity, I can play in the Unity editor. Then I can open up my Fmod project and connect to the game. And I can see everything work in real time. I can even adjust things on the fly in Fmod, and it will change in Unity, much like Unity's audio mixer kind of works, but even more in depth. You can also use the profiler in Fmod and WIS and basically record a gameplay session and see all the statistics for it. Like, how much CPU am I using? How many voices am I using? Are these events triggering the way I expect? You can troubleshoot issues basically very, very easily that way, which is very useful. And it can get even more useful when you're exporting, when the game is going to a bunch of different platforms and there are certain specs and limitations you need to keep in mind. It can be very powerful for that. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of useful things beyond just the sort of creative possibilities of using middleware. Now, that doesn't mean every project needs it. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you need to do it. And so being aware of it is important. And sometimes it's a good idea. Like if you're a developer and you're working with an audio person and they suggest using middleware, hear them out and maybe see what the pros and cons of using it are. Sometimes the developer immediately is like, no, I don't want to do that. But definitely hear out the audio person, because there might be things that you could do in the game that would just straight up enhance the game that wouldn't be possible otherwise, or would require you as the developer to create a very sophisticated audio system to do the same thing, and you probably don't want to do that. It's going to be a couple weeks of work on your end to do what Fmod is going to do immediately, and will only take you about 30 minutes to integrate into your engine, and then maybe another hour or two to learn the coding hooks, and you're done. It is a very quick and up and running system to kind of work with. But yeah, I guess that's my take on middleware there.
Cool. We've got a couple questions from other members. I'm going to throw one out here. Can you speak a little bit of your success as a freelancer / small company, and maybe business lessons you learned along the way?
Ah, yes. So freelancing is like its own talk. I mean, and I've done talks on freelancing, and it's a huge thing. It's really important as a creative person to understand that you're running a business. You are running a client-based business. It is a creative endeavor, right? But you still are running a business, and you really need to treat it as such. You need to be serious about and know about just simple things like knowing how to do taxes as a business, right? Knowing, having task management software, just like being organized about stuff, making sure that you're keeping track of all the projects you're working on, making sure you're keeping track of communication. When was the last time you talked to somebody, right? Should you be contacting them? Have you let things lapse, right? Making sure you always have infinite runway. So even if you're on a project, you need to be looking for other projects. Don't get this sense of false security because you're working on a really awesome project. Because then what happens is when that project's over, you're like, okay, I need more work and I don't have anything lined up, right? That's the worst thing. So, it's when you're most comfortable that you need to start feeling uncomfortable. I'd say like it's programmed in me right now. This actually just happened yesterday. I was talking to my wife about it because right now we're very busy and things are going very well. This is the best quarter we've ever had, like far and away. But it's making me feel that sense like of dread. Like I have all these projects and we have work, we have a runway, but it immediately triggers this thing in me that thinks like, I got to really evaluate that runway and figure out really how much work do we have coming up? And do I need to start putting some effort into finding new work? Right. But yeah, in terms of starting out, right. You can use things like, obviously using Twitter is very helpful. Game dev kind of lives on Twitter for better, for worse. A lot of it is for worse, but some of it is for better. It can be good for networking and getting to meet people. Discord servers are great, but they tend to be more personal. And what ends up happening is you maybe know people too well to work with them. That can be a thing. Obviously, going to conventions is a huge thing. Right now, that is not possible. But going to like GDC, we get work every year from going to GDC. That does not mean that we get the gig while we're there. We meet people, we network, and maybe a couple months later, someone we met has a project for us, right? It's more about letting people know you exist. Just kind of always throwing yourself out there, making sure people know you exist, and then they will come to you. You know, if you're good at making an impression, if you believe in your own work, and how well it stands on its own, people will come to you. As far as freelancing, like game audio, or honestly just freelancing in general in games, as a creative person, I think a big part of it is just having that game that people know, right? Mm-hmm. A game that someone has heard of. And it really kind of sucks, to be honest, because you could have really great soundtracks and it doesn't matter because the game didn't do well. You know, you could have a game that does really well and it's the soundtrack you actually thought was bad. It was objectively worse than another project you did. And that's the one that everyone knows you by, right? And you're making all this money off Spotify and Bandcamp sales, et cetera, right? And you know, and that's the one that's like your bread and butter, right? But that's just how it goes. So yeah, a lot of freelancing is kind of grinding it out for 2-3 years, working on projects that may amount to nothing, right? And you just keep working on it until you get something that has some notoriety of some kind, you know? And then that is going to be sort of like your launching point, and you need to seize that opportunity, and make sure that you're putting a lot of effort into representing yourself well, having a good website, having good online presence, you know, and maybe, you know, starting to solicit a little more with, you know, and name dropping, right? There's no harm in that, you know. Whenever we solicit, we usually are throwing in something in there, right? Like names of projects we worked on that are, you know, that are going to appeal to the people that we are soliciting towards, right? If it's like a mobile company, we'll mention some projects we work on that were mobile games that definitely have notoriety, right? You know, knowing who you're talking to is definitely important. Anyways, I could go on like forever about this, but I know there's more questions, and I can't. We do have some interviews about freelancing somewhere, and maybe I can help link you to that after this. But yeah, definitely just like you got to run it like a business. You got to treat it like a business. And if you're really bad at that and you're bad at getting yourself out there and networking, it's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be really, really tough. Unless you just get lucky and you just have a game that does incredibly well. And maybe you had like a revenue share on it or something. And you're just like getting checks in the mail. And, you know, you were like an indie darling or something, right? And you just made a ton of money, right? It's, you know, for most people, that's not gonna be the situation. You're gonna be grinding, you're gonna be networking. And so you need to get in that mindset. And if you're an introverted person, you have to kind of figure out, how can I still do this? How can I network in a way, even though I'm not the most outgoing person in the world, right? All right, anyways, moving on.
Yeah, so we have a question from the YouTube chat, which is it says, how do I make it so that audio fits with models? Which I'm going to interpret to mean like, yeah, how do you, what is the general process for, I guess, creating a sound palette for a character, and especially I would imagine to do with like Foley, synchronizing audio to animations and things like that.
Sure. Well, there's a couple ways to do it. The main way is that you're going to do some gameplay capture. You're going to video cap playing the game. And you are just literally going to throw that into your audio software, and you're going to make sounds right on top of that so that you know that the sound is going to sync up perfectly. Maybe you will give the developer implementation notes saying, hey, start on this frame. Maybe even take a picture of the frame in the animation. This is where it starts. Or just try to get all your sounds to start on an obvious first frame of an animation. You know, you get pretty good, like just looking at gameplay and just sort of moving frame by frame through the video and figure out where is the animation frame starting for this action or whatever, right? Usually it's pretty obvious unless the animator is just like too smooth, right? And it's like too good, right? It can be very difficult to figure out where the animation frames are starting. But anyways, that's like an important thing. Also, depending on what software you're doing for animation, like using Spine or something like that, right? There's a lot of opportunities for that where you could basically split up the sound into different sections based off animation frames. So that even if let's say it's a longer animation, and maybe depending on the end user's processor, et cetera, it doesn't time out exactly the same every time, right? So maybe you've split the sound up into 3 different slices and they trigger at certain points in the animation. And you can, again, just communicate with if the artist is doing the spine stuff, communicate with the artist about where in those animation frames and spine are those sounds going to trigger. Unity has some built-in animation tools as well, where you can trigger sounds directly within various frames of an animation. So in terms of sync, that's typically what you're doing. In terms of direction, like what sound should I use for jump, right? It's just, it's all about aesthetic, right? It's like, should it be an airy whoosh? Should it have a lot of footsteps, scraping, jumping off, skidding sound, like I'm going, I'm sort of like jumping off the ground, right? Should it be interpretive, right? And it's not actually trying to follow the actual act of jumping. It's just like maybe a simple sine wave is a whoop, right? Or, or is it just something really bizarre sounding, right? Maybe it's like you're a bug and whenever you jump, it has this little skittering kind of sound, right? Just whatever, right? You can do whatever you want, right? So it's about, one thing to think about is what aesthetic do I want? How am I going to, what direction do I want to take to match to the visual, right? But those are all just creative decisions, basically. But being aware of the different types of sort of directions you could go is important, right? Should it be super realistic sounding? Should it be more cartoony sounding? Should it be more interpretive, where it sounds that are just creative interpretations of what's going on, and they're not directly related at all to the actual action, right? Yeah, I guess that's what I would say for that.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think one thing that I always try to think about as a sound designer is like, what do I expect this to sound like based on everything that's going on? What do I expect to hear? And that's a lot of what informs what I try to make.
Yeah, and going with that or going against that sometimes, right?
True.
Going against the expectation.
I've got another question here. What advice would you have for any developers who do not have the financial means to hire a dedicated audio person?
Sure. Well, there's a bunch of options, right? If you're doing something that is more just like retro, you can just use the 8-bit generator. There's one called BXFR. There's some really good ones out there now that are better than that. Just look up like 8-bit sound effects generator. Just put that in Google. You are going to find a couple pieces of software that are very easy to use. You click jump, and every time you click jump, it just randomly creates a new jumpy sound, right? But they're going to sound very retro, like very like NES sounding. Now, that could work for your game, right? It certainly works for prototypes. It's great for prototypes or game jams, but it might even just fit the game you're working on, period. Now, if you want to bring someone on, but you cannot afford to pay them, there are obviously options. And this goes for freelancing too. If you're freelancing audio and starting out and people are not going to have budgets, right? Then think of other options. Think of obviously like keeping the rights to your music if you're a composer, right? And being able to do whatever you want with that. That could give you some financial gain from doing the project. Obviously, revenue share is a big thing, right? So if you're a developer and you don't have a budget for audio, but you need good audio and you know it, you're going to have to give up some revenue share. You need to talk to, work out some kind of deal with your audio person. And say, okay, well, for every percent of, for every game sold after like fees from distributors like Steam and, the Google Play Store, et cetera, that money that's left over that would go to the developer, a percentage of that is going to go to the audio person, right? And pay them whatever frequency you want, quarterly, yearly, whatever, with maybe a term ending. Say, okay, after a year or two, we're done, and I'm not paying you any more revenue share. That could be a thing. Or you can barter, right? If you are a developer that's very good at art or website design, something, maybe you can barter. Say, hey, do some tracks for this game, and I'm going to help you with your website, right? Or I'm going to help you make some art for branding your company, right? Just stuff like that. Get creative. Because I think that's always an important thing. As an audio person, you should never work for free, just straight up. You should always, unless it's like a game jam, of course, right? But if you're working on a real project that's going to be somewhat long-term, you should get some compensation, even if you know that it can't be a direct monetary compensation right off the bat up front. You got to value yourself, right? If you're working for free all the time, that becomes your new expectation. You are worthless, right? It's like, you need to be worth something, and hold yourself to a standard and continue to raise that bar as you have more success and are working on projects that have more of a budget, right? Anyways, yeah, so that's how I would probably answer that question.
Cool. I have a question as well, which is basically just, can you talk about the experience of sort of, especially when starting out as a freelancer, as a freelance composer, especially establishing a standard response to work inquiries? Sort of a baseline, like...
Yeah. So are you talking about you soliciting to a developer? Is that what you're talking about?
Talking more about, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'd like to hire you to work on a project,
Gotcha. Okay. The other way around.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, you kind of have to feel out the project first, right? Starting out though, I'm honestly, when we started out, we pretty much said yes to everything, and just found a way to make it work. Like I said, through revenue share or whatever, even if there was no budget, because it was just about getting experience too. I mean, starting out, you just need experience. There's so much you're going to learn from just working on a game that isn't about making music or making sound design. There's so many other aspects. Because again, this is a business. This is a client-based business. You are working for someone else, even if it's a collaborative effort. In the end, they are paying you to do something in some way, shape, or form, right? And so there's so many other things that go into it, like communication. It's a skill that you've got to work on, right? So you just want to get projects and take them and learn new things, even if it's not even a style that's up your alley, right? Like if they're like, okay, we're making a kiddie game that is, I don't know, a match 3, and you learn about the alphabet. And you're like, well, I only want to make orchestral sounds for MMOs, all right? And this is not to my standards. Like, no, just do it. You're going to learn so much from doing it. Just do it. Be open to stuff. It's ridiculous to be closed-minded if you're a freelancer, because it's so hard to break into this industry. You have to be able to do a lot of styles of music, and you have to be able to work with a wide variety of people. You got to be able to work with a developer and kind of figure out what makes them tick and how to work best with them, right? And the more people you work with, the more you're going to get good at doing that, right? But anyways, yeah, so if you get a working career early on, I'd pretty much just be like, yeah, but you should learn more about the game, obviously. You should learn more about the project, and I usually like to ask, like, how long it's been in development, what the timeline is for it, how much time is left in development, at what point in development have they sort of reached out to you, so you know what you're working with. If you have more freedom to create a direction because it's early on in the game, or if it's in the final hours of the game and you're just supposed to just slap something on real quick, maybe you don't have much directional freedom and they have a very set idea and you just got to work within that. Or maybe there's not going to be time to iterate. You work on something, you're not going to get a chance to change it. Once you put it in game, you realize you got to change something about it to make it fit better. Too bad. It's too late. Or maybe they'll implement it themselves and it's not implemented the way that it should have been implemented, the way you expect it to be implemented. And it's too late. Now you're just stuck with a ship game that has like a sound that wasn't put in the way you expected. You just got to live with it, right? So like knowing expectations, I think a lot of it is sort of like having good expectations so that there's no weirdness as the project goes on, right? You want when you start a project, your expectations to match up with when the project ends, right? And this is from not just the stuff I talked about, but also even from legal standpoint with contracts and stuff, right? That's why you're doing a contract, because you're creating an expectation standard for how things are going to go with your work and with the finances of it, right? How you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid, how that's all going to work, right? But yeah, I usually just get to know more about the developer too. It's definitely very, very helpful knowing with their time zone, even just like when you can talk to them, right? But yeah, definitely learning more about the scope of the game, how much you're going to do, the timeline, what you've got to work with. Those are definitely like important things to know. You obviously are going to ask about budget. This is the age-old question, right? Two guys at gunpoint in the Western, right? One guy's like, it's a shootout, right? And one guy's like, what's your budget? And the other guy's like, what's your rates? What's your budget? What's your rates? Right? It goes back and forth, right? Because developers assume that when you're asking for budget, you're just going to inflate your rates to fit their budget, right? Right. You're going to try to get paid the most amount you can, but that's not necessarily true. It's more about just knowing how much you can do, right? Do I have to, if you need, if you want a game to work and it really needs 100 sound effects, but you only have a budget for 20 sound effects, right? Based off what you told me your budget is. That's important for me to know. Because then I can decide, well, do I want to just walk away from the project because I don't think that I can create a good product, right? Based off the budget you have? Or do I need to get creative? And we're going to have a conversation about how can we creative with 20 sound effects and make that work by like using pitch shifting. Maybe one of the sounds is lowered quite a bit for a different sound situation in a game. You know, maybe your coin pickup sound is an explosion just pitched up really, really high, right? You're double dipping in sounds, right? You're going to find creative ways to make that work. So like, that's why budget is important, I think. But usually what will happen is they'll want to know your rates because they don't have a budget or they don't know what their budget is for audio. And they want to know what you charge so they can sort of like figure out how much money they need to set aside. So it's kind of a back and forth. It's better for you to figure out the budget and then kind of talk about rates after that and say, okay, well, with my rates, I can fit with this or whatever. But it's sort of a give and take. You have to sort of feel that out. Sometimes I pretty much know immediately when I'm talking to someone whether or not they're going to want my rates first or they're going to be willing to tell me their budget, right? But yeah, it's something you got to feel out. So yeah, when you're talking with someone, there's a lot of things to feel out right off the bat. And that's, again, why working on a lot of projects is important. Get on as many projects as you can because you need to get used to this and get good at it, right? So yeah, I guess that's my answer to that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to be super respectful of your time. I have one last pressing question I know everybody's dying to hear. How do you feel about the sea shanties going on?
It's it's cool. I'm not gonna hop on it, There's always something is always the most important thing in social media, right?
I know, I just had to ask.
Yeah. Well, they got some great harmonies going on there.
They do. It gets a little out of hand, though. It's kind of weird with the whole thing of someone making something and someone just like saying, now I'm part of this, right? And it's like, and then which one of those now I'm part of, because it's 5 different people will like add the sea shanty at the same time. It's like, which one of those becomes the winner, right? Because when you look at the famous sea shanty one that was really popular, right? And sort of like got really exploded, right? It's like, there were multiple people that added that their little version didn't get tacked onto, right? It's like, it's one each iteration, someone that iterated became the winner, right?
I guess,
and then someone added to that, and that became popular, right? So it's just the weirdest like bracket.
TikTok is now the great equalizer.
Yeah, it's just the weirdest thing to me, and it's like I don't know. Yeah, people that put a lot of time investment in that, I'm like, why? Why would you do that? I don't know. TikTok is something I need to look into, though. I feel like as an audio person or a music person, it's maybe something that I should explore for fan base, or maybe I should just stay the hell away from it. I don't know. I'm feeling like I should just stay away from it, but maybe I'll look into it. I don't know. I'm too old for TikTok, right?
2 hugely diverging paths in life, depending on whether you choose to install TikTok.
Yeah, I can only be in so many social media pools at once, right? As a company, I can only invest time in certain things, right?
True.
Because I got to work. Can't spend all day on social media, right? So it's like I got to pick and choose the things that are important. And for us, it's been more important to focus on developers and networking and industry than fans of our music, etc. That's great, and that's a byproduct of us working on games that become popular, right? In the end, our fan base is going to grow because we work on a game that is immensely popular and we do a cool soundtrack. No matter how hard we try to like hustle, right? With building a fan base. So for us, if you are an audio person or a composer trying to build a fan base with game audio, it might just be better for you in the long run and also better for you financially and just for your career to just focus on, networking with, industry stuff, right? For us, that's been a very, very solid thing for us. Like, we don't have a huge social media following, but it's fine because we're doing better than a lot of people we know in game audio that have a bigger following than us. This is a full-time job for me now. Like, things are going really well, right? But I don't have, 10,000, 20,000, 1 million followers on social media. So I don't know. Yeah. It's not a gauge of your success.
Clout does not equal work.
Yes, it's like if I advertise my game on Twitter, right, to my developer friends, right, and I get 1,000 likes for our trailer, does that equal $1,000 of sales?
Yeah.
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. You know, it's just like Spotify, right?
Yep.
A million streams is what, I don't know, 10K or something, right? Maybe
Something like that.
it's not good. It's not good. But anyways, well, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate. You know, I always like doing these things. It's fun. You know, if people do have further questions, they can definitely like hit me up. You can find me on Twitter, right? And I do accept like DMs that are not people I follow or whatever. So just like hit me up with a question. I'm happy to answer. I'm an open book. I'm you know, it's so freaking hard to like do what I'm doing. I'm really lucky to be here, and so like I want to help people out as best I can to try to like to either do audio freelancing, right, or just if you have questions generally about development and stuff like that, because you know we worked with enough teams by now that we've seen it all, and work with publishers and stuff like that. So in terms of like, oh, how do I pitch to a publisher and stuff like that, you know, these are questions that I might be able to help answer, even though I'm not a direct developer.
Yeah, I think audio has a long way to go compared to like other creative forms of media in just demystifying it to lay people. So always really appreciate just having opportunities like this to just talk about this stuff, get it out there, and get people familiar with what the process is like.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Pat.
And,
No problem. It's a pleasure.
All right.
Cool.
See you later.
All right. Bye.
All right.